Welcome to the eighth and likely final virtual hearing of the Penn Public Safety Review and Outreach Initiative. I'm Dorothy Roberts, a Penn Integrates Knowledge Professor of Law, Africana Studies, and Sociology, and I, along with Reverend Chaz Howard, are leading this initiative as appointed advisors to Penn President Amy Gutmann. Reverend Howard will introduce himself and welcome you in a minute. We're working with the law school's Quattrone Center for the Fair Administration of Justice, and you'll hear from its executive director, John Holloway, after Reverend Howard. The Public Safety Review and Outreach Initiative is conducting a comprehensive review of public safety at Penn. The goal of the review is to assess Penn's success in creating a physically and emotionally safe environment on campus and in surrounding neighborhoods, while treating every person with equal dignity and respect, and in a way that prioritizes and promotes anti-racism, racial equality, and racial justice. The outcome of the initiative will be a report and recommendations we'll present to President Amy Gutmann, Executive Vice President Craig Carnaroli, and Provost Wendell Pritchett in October. Our report and recommendations will be based on two main efforts. First, we've been collecting and reviewing hundreds of documents from Penn's Division of Public Safety regarding a wide range of policies, procedures, and outcomes, including use of force, vehicle and pedestrian stops, complaints, budgets, transparency, and relationships with other policing agencies. The second part is why we're here now. We're holding a series. We've held a series, this is the final one, of virtual hearings to receive input from members of the Penn and West Philadelphia communities on their experiences with Penn's Division of Public Safety and on their ideas and suggestions. The hearings are made publicly available via live stream and recorded for future public access. Reverend Howard and I have long records of commitment to racial justice, and we approach our leadership of this initiative very seriously and independently. We've been given complete freedom to listen, to learn, and to make recommendations without any pressure from the university administration. Our aim is to move Penn toward achieving a vision of public safety that treats everyone with equal respect, in which everyone feels physically and emotionally safe with a sense of equal belonging, and that prioritizes racial justice. Many of us are finding it hard to go on with business as usual after the recent police violence and ongoing protests in Kenosha, Wisconsin, Rochester, New York, and other parts of the nation. The work of reimagining public safety is more urgent than ever, and we're very grateful to everyone in the Penn and neighboring communities who are participating in this initiative. We're especially thankful to have Penn students here at the last hearing and others, and today, who've been the focus of so much of what we've heard about policing at Penn in past hearings. And I'll now turn to my co-presidential advisor, Reverend Chaz Howard.
Thank you, Professor Roberts, and thank you everybody for tuning in this afternoon. And a special thank you to those who've tuned in just about every day that we've had these hearings. It's been an informative journey, but one that we know has been challenging and emotional for a whole lot of us, regardless of our perspective or connections to public safety and policing. And so we thank everybody who's contributed to this journey. Special gratitude to the Quattrone Center, who's done so much of the heavy lifting and the gathering of paperwork and really the administrative work in making these hearings public and the recording and sharing of them as well. That's been an important part of our work here today, making sure that this isn't a private behind closed doors process, but that it's public, that it's open. Transparency has been one of the words that has come up every single week. We wanted to make sure that anybody who had a vested interest in this process could be a part of it. Likewise, we've been open to a full range of perspectives. We wanted to make sure that we heard from people with a lot of different experiences on and around our campus, people within Penn Public Safety and specifically Penn Police, students, faculty, staff, even some alumni too. And we're grateful for everybody who has engaged us along this way. So once again, thank you for joining us and taking time out of your day to be with us. And I now turn it over to Executive Director of the Quattrone Center, John Hallway.
Thanks, Reverend Howard, and thank you, Professor Roberts, for your introductory remarks and your partnership throughout the process. I'm John Hallway. I'm the Executive Director of the Quattrone Center for the Fair Administration of Justice here at the law school. And along with my colleagues, I want to extend our sincere welcome to the members of the Penn community we will be hearing from today, and to those of you who are watching or will be watching later on and sending questions online as we conduct this, the 8th and final hearing in our Public Safety Review and Outreach Initiative, soliciting input from our community on these important issues. Throughout these hearings, we've learned a great deal about the many ways that the Division of Public Safety interacts with the community, which we broadly define to include both the campus itself and our West Philadelphia surroundings. Each person who's participated has provided a valuable and unique perspective, not just with regard to what our relationships with the Division of Public Safety are today, but in terms of conceiving what they could be or should be in the future to truly create an environment where all members of the community feel not just physically, but emotionally safe at Penn. Now that classes are back in session, our last hearing, which took place on Tuesday, September the 15th, focused on input from student leaders, including Jason Andrzejczyk, the Director of Equity and Access from YAPSA, Kristen Yukioma, a representative from the Undergraduate Assembly, Victoria Sanchez, the co-president of the Latinx Law Students Association, and Leigh Brutus, president of the Black Law Students Association. If you were unable to participate in that live, you can go to www.pennpublicsafetyreview.org to hear the full conversation and question and answer sessions. We post that recording alongside all of the other hearings, and we are adding written transcripts for each of those hearings as they become available. Today, we're going to hear again primarily from student voices, and we're adding a representative from the Division of Public Safety who will share with us some of the DPS initiatives in place to provide that sense of broader physical and emotional safety to the greater community they serve. And I want to welcome and thank our speakers for their time today. We're going to hear from Michaela Warwick, a 2020 graduate of Penn who, along with her colleagues at Collective Climb, won a President's Engagement Prize and has been working to create a restorative justice youth diversion program. Kathleen Shields Anderson, the Executive Director of Operations and Chief of Staff of the Division of Public Safety. Natalie Zamora of the Penn Latin American Graduate and Professional Student Assembly. Tatiana Johnson of the student group Beyond Arrests, Rethinking Systemic Oppression, or BARS, and Carson Eckard, Chair External for SKEW, the Student Committee on Undergraduate Education. Each of these speakers has been invited to share a brief opening statement, one at a time. Once each of them has spoken, after each one of them has spoken, Professor Roberts and Reverend Howard will engage with them in a question and answer session. The ground rules for this hearing are the same as for prior, but just for the record, we are recording this webinar. We will post the recording and transcript on our Public Safety Review and Outreach website, pennpublicsafetyreview.org. Members of the audience are encouraged to submit questions at any time through the Q&A feature at the bottom of the window. We are monitoring that Q&A, but in order to make sure that each speaker has a full opportunity to speak within the time allotted, we may not be able to get questions in real time. We will keep a record of all the questions and we'll strive to answer them to the extent possible. We recognize that the topics we discuss are deeply felt and can be emotional throughout our community, and we ask that members of the audience please continue to do as you have done in the past and keep your questions topical and appropriate. And with that, I will turn it back to Professor Roberts, Reverend Dr. Howard, and our first speaker, Michaela Warwick.
Please go ahead, Michaela.
Thank you so much. Yes, Dr. Roberts, Reverend Howard, and the Quattrone Center for making this space. I'm optimistic that the recommendations that arise in this forum today, the previous sessions, can transform the Division of Public Safety to embrace one core idea that West Philadelphia and Penn are not separate entities, but closely linked in times of peace and in times that the broken pieces of our nation are laid out to bear. So As mentioned earlier, I'm here on behalf of Collective Climb. It's a group that recently received the President's Engagement Prize, and that is an initiative for seniors who are looking to better humanity with their project. And for us, we're seeking to institute a West Philadelphia-based youth restorative justice program with the eventual aim of becoming a recognized diversion program that shields youth from contact with the juvenile justice system. This is a deeply collaborative initiative that we've taken on, and we acknowledge that community members and local organizations, schools, public safety systems, and youth are critical to the success of our mission. So that's what brings us, or me today, to this platform to share new recommendations and echo some sentiments that were previously mentioned to ensure that West Philadelphia means building community, earning trust, and acting with care at the center. To ensure that safety in West Philadelphia. So first, we wanted to uphold views expressed by West Philadelphia Neighborhood Association heads at a previous hearing. They shared examples of where the Division of Public Safety had successfully catered to their community needs and their concerns. So they specifically shared support by referencing the familiarity that they felt with the officers in the patrol zones, the fast and reliable responsiveness to calls that they received when compared to the city police, as well as officer visibility and support during beloved community events such as the Baltimore Dollar Stroll. But we wanted to expand this notion of community support and centering community need to shift the definition of safety to start and end with the community in mind. And a lot of that means taking into account how policing agencies have and continue to negatively affect low-income minority communities by compounding with other forms of structural inequity. So one point that was mentioned before is, it's one thing for a policing agency to try and not be racist, but it's an entirely different thing to be anti-racist. So I, along with members of my team, believe that packaging and sealing away trauma, whether it's intentionally caused or otherwise, does not create the long-standing progress. It creates some quick wins, but real change will occur when we listen to our people, tend to the deep wounds they hold, dream of a just future, and then disrupt the status quo to set the stage for those changes. So with all of that in mind, the recommendations that I'm about to list are not a panacea for anything that I mentioned, but they may provide a foundation for some innovative, unexplored pathways for creating change. So in our view, several measures, I'm about to use a word that you all have said was mentioned at every single hearing so far, but those are responsibility, transparency, and accountability. So first, we do not believe that it is the Division of Public Safety's responsibility to be a criminalizing agent in an already highly surveilled area. The conglomeration of the Division of Public Safety, Drexel Police, U Sciences, as well as the Philadelphia Police heighten the perception and reality of being watched, followed, or profiled for those who call this area home. So in reaction, we believe the Division of Public Safety can curb this by finding alternative interventions that differ from more punitive actions taken by the state. This could mean, but is certainly not limited to, utilizing cost-effective diversion programs rooted in the community as the first resort, even when responding to offenses that may be of greater severity. Perhaps, unsurprisingly, we support restorative interventions. Presently, the Division of Public Safety partners with PAL, or the Police Athletic League, to direct youth contacted by officers on this campus to free after-school mentorship and academic programming. And from what we've heard, it's been fruitful. So we advocate for the expansion of this sort of diversion with more community-based and or maybe even university-funded programming. Eventually, we would love for these referrals to extend to adults, to connect them with programming that may provide housing, rehabilitation, job training and placement, healthcare assistance, education, or something that's centering the core needs. So in line with this, we do believe that it may be worth exploring and having non-armed, trauma-informed crisis management professionals to respond to certain calls, both on Penn's campus and in the community. So next, we believe that the Division of Public Safety could be more transparent as it pertains to their hiring, training practices, as well as its relationship with the Philadelphia Police Department. Though we acknowledge that a comprehensive hiring practice may already be in place, our call for transparency in hiring coincides with the statewide desire for more accessible information, such as the database that could provide information on officers' names, badge numbers, information on whether or not they've been transferred from another department or their infraction history. And additionally, the relationship between the Division of Public Safety and the Philadelphia Police Department is presently unclear to those who aren't a part of that partnership. And it can be inferred that there is a memorandum of understanding that establishes the power structure, the differences between a municipal and a Penn police initiated arrest, the official edges of the jurisdiction that Penn has to interfere. But presently, it's difficult to find that information. And we would like to propose that this be publicly available information on the Division of Public Safety webpage. And furthermore, if there are any alterations made to that MOU or one day that it gets rewritten, that members of the community could have a say on the agreement as a signee. Lastly, I've been talking for a minute, so I'm going to get through this one. We believe that the Division of Public Safety's accountability structure could be reassessed. So presently, there is an advisory board to the Division of Public Safety consisting of professors, faculty who meet quarterly to evaluate operations. However, this is currently not an oversight. They have no oversight powers. So we advise strengthening the power of the advisory board to be a working policy recommending body and restructuring the constituency to include community members and maybe even student leaders. So our other accountability rooted recommendation involves looking at union contracts, particularly the protections afforded to officers who may have been accused of wrongdoing. Currently, disciplinary actions go through the officers to the chief of patrol, then to VP Rush, and potentially to HR, which is the neutral third party review that can recommend arbitration or in the process. But however, as it currently stands, most officers don't make it to the neutral third party review. And kind of looking at regulatory sciences, it is noted that in-house auditors are far more likely to try to protect that institution and maybe even breach some compliance laws. So to address this, we propose that the reporting structure could place the advisory board within this process at an early intervention. For example, after a complaint is received, the advisory board could review the complaint, make recommendations before it moves on to the superintendent, in this case, VP Rush, who could then take into account and do their best to honor the concerns given and recommendations given by the advisory board. So thank you so much for giving me the space to share my opinions and those of my colleagues.
Thank you so much for your very helpful and comprehensive comments. It's clear you've been listening to the hearings because you've answered lots of questions that we've had that perhaps haven't been answered or at least elaborated on them. And I really appreciate your very concrete recommendations because we're at that point now where we can use advice about that. So that was a terrific set of comments that you gave us. And there's lots to explore in that, but let me I'll just start with a couple questions about aspects of your remarks. One was that it was interesting that you started out immediately by saying that Penn and West Philadelphia aren't two separate communities, and that community is really relevant and important to thinking about public safety at Penn. And so, number one, I'd like you to say a little bit more about why it is that in thinking about Penn public safety and Penn's police department, we have to take into account the broader community and our surrounding neighborhoods. And then secondly, your comment on responsibility and how Penn Police should not be a criminalizing agency. The suggestion that Penn look to diversion programs and non-armed crisis management professionals. And I wonder if those people could be someone other than police officers. So I wasn't sure if you were saying the Penn police could do that, or if you might be suggesting that there are roles that the Penn police are playing now that might be better filled by other kinds of professionals, especially those who aren't armed. So if you could just answer those two questions. I know that's a lot, but it doesn't even touch on some of your other recommendations, but I want to start there. Thanks.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. I'll try my best. And if I miss anything, please feel free to redirect me. So for me, when I think of Penn, I cannot think of it as something that is discrete from West Philadelphia, simply because they border each other. The university city idea is something that came about. It was originally West Philadelphia, and there was a marketing approach to make University City seem to be something discrete. And based on the way that these two environments interact, it's very clear that it's not really something that would be separate without an intentional approach to try to make it seem that way. And so I'm of the firm belief that what is good for West Philadelphia is also good for many of the problems that are facing Penn, and particularly as we think about the experience of Black and Brown students who's closer matching the demographics of West Philadelphia. If we can center the needs of West Philly, then we can also take into account the needs of those students. And as I mentioned, being hyper surveilled or feeling the emotional weight and trauma of being around a policing agency. So that's kind of my take on that first part. And the second part, when thinking about who would be the non-armed, trauma-informed responders. So in some capacities, I am imagining there being people who are not trained as officers, who are more trained to be in the crisis management roles, the more humanistic roles as responders to certain cases. Now, it is worth noting that we do have, trained officers who are employed here, and there are instances of violence that do occur where someone may be armed or someone may have been robbed. And I understand in those instances, the officers are better equipped potentially to ensure that the public is safe. But other cases, particularly those that are the quality of life crimes, or if you want to call it a crime, I choose not to, my own belief, but that, or if you see like a public dispute, those are things that could be better managed when you don't see an officer coming to potentially create a heightened response.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you for your remarks, and thank you for your work. And again, congratulations on President's Engagement Prize and both of your initiatives, and particularly the latest iteration of it. My question is about this work that you and your colleagues are doing around alternatives to punitive and criminal responses to behavior. Have you, and it's a little more personal, have you shared this vision with anyone in public safety? And if so, how did that go? And then kind of more broadly, over your 4-ish years here in West Philadelphia, how have your personal interactions been with Penn Police and public safety?
Thank you so much, Reverend Howard. So yes, we have talked to the Division of Public Safety, particularly Kathleen, who will be speaking at some point today, as well as Vice President Rush. We also talked to Lieutenant Williams earlier on in one of our earlier conversations, and admittedly, they were really receptive to the idea of diversion. So I say that there is space, and as I mentioned with Powell, precedent to start a conversation around creating opportunities for diversion. So this is a pathway that we've explored, we've presented, and the mechanics of starting it is mostly the largest kind of conversation. It's a new way of thinking about something. It's a new way of acting. So that'll probably be what takes in my view, the convincing, but the idea of having diversion and not being a criminalizing force is something that, in my view, has been seen as supported. And my own experiences as a student, well, so I never personally had a run-in with the Division of Public Safety. I have had a kind of heightened encounter with the security officers here, where I was accused of not being a real Penn student, and my ID needed to be seen, and they took down my name because they accused me of trespassing. So that was, a lot, and my tensions were, I was up here because I was like, how dare you do this to me? It was my third year at the time. And it just felt like no matter what I do, no matter what I try to contribute to this university, I still am not seen as a true part of this. I know it's not true, but the perception of that really, really got to me, and also really shaped kind of my own views and my own personal reactions to like why safety as it is currently imagined may not actually be what safety should mean. So there's that. And there are other folks I know who have talked about having a tense encounter with division stories.
Thanks so much.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think your recommendations about accountability were crystal clear. And so I have no further questions, but really appreciate your remarks, and congratulations on your award as well.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Ms. Warwick, for your time. We'll turn now to Kathleen Shields Anderson, the Executive Director of Operations and Chief of Staff of the Division of Public Safety. Ms. Anderson.
Thank you, John. First, I want to thank everybody for inviting me to speak today. Professor Roberts, Reverend Chaz, Paul, and John in the Quattrone Center. Good to see all of you. I want to take my time to address three themes that I think are important to understanding public safety at Penn: community, innovation, and fairness. And I don't think these themes are much different from a lot of the themes that we've heard throughout these hearings. And these are the tenets of our public safety program. First, let me say all of us at Public Safety, from Vice President Rush on down, have been quite engaged in these hearings, and we've listened to all of them. We've heard a lot of hard things about individual experiences from people we know directly, as well as the state of policing in America. And we commend the bravery of all who have participated in these hearings and who have been willing to start these really hard conversations. At our core, we are a community-based organization. We work at a world-class university and health system dedicated to teaching, research, and service. And we partner with faculty in criminology, law, social policy and practice, Wharton, nursing, medicine, on research and in projects. Our officers are students too, and this helps inform our profession on both the micro and the macro level. We want to be a model for our community, as well as a catalyst for broader change. This commitment to community leads us to our motto, which I know you have heard several times throughout these hearings. It's all about relationships. Those relationships are necessary with faculty, staff, students, and the West Philadelphia community members, and our law enforcement partners as well. We have the ability to build those relationships in a way that large municipal departments do not. That said, we have a very large community in which to build. 10,000 undergraduates, 10,000 graduate students, roughly 40,000 faculty and staff, 55,000 members of the West Philadelphia community residents, as well as 86,000 daily commuters and visitors to our health system. We connect with people at every level, every day. We do this through many of the programs previously discussed, through Officer Nicole Taylor, who you all had the pleasure of meeting several hearings ago, through Lieutenant Gary Williams, through Officer Dave Dagger, and that's just to name a few of our officers who are out in the community every day. They attend these monthly Civic Association meetings, and you heard from many Civic Association leaders. They go to their information centers. They attend their community events. They visit local schools and nursing homes, and they talk to people on their stoops and during their morning commutes. They get to know our community. We all do. We do this through College House and Resource Center liaison programs, our DPS advisory board, which has been of great discussion, which is in fact made up of faculty, staff, and students. There are students on our advisory board, and we use them as a sounding board for new ideas, as well as a critique of our actions. We have regular meetings with the UA, GAPSA, UMC, Umoja, the Faculty Senate, Penn Professional Staff Association, international students, College House programs, and we attend and give lectures in classes. We attend and support events like Take Back the Night, vigils for victims of hate, rallies for Black Lives Matter, and other events. We are a part of our community at every level. Our relationships also expand beyond our campus and patrol zone with our public safety partners. This model of collaborating with other agencies leads us to information sharing, to an understanding of who we are and who our community is, and to innovation. And that brings me to my next theme, innovation and problem solving. We are problem solvers at heart, right? We get into public service to help our neighbors, to help our community. And we bring that to our work every day. We see challenges and we work together with our partners and our community to find solutions. One recent example of this is our Alternative Response Unit, or AR1. This is a partnership with the Philadelphia Fire Department. So AR1 is a fire department staffed SUV. It's staffed by a paramedic and an EMT, and they respond to low acuity student medical emergencies at peak hours within our patrol zone. The problem we were looking to solve there was how to encourage Penn students to call for emergency medical help while removing fears of discipline for intoxication or other things, as well as just to remove the financial barriers and provide access to care, especially for low-income first-generation students. Additionally, Philadelphia ambulances consistently operate in excess of capacity, well over 100% capacity on a regular basis. So by starting this ARU program, we have freed up scarce ambulance resources for the Philadelphia community, while also providing quality care to our students. This program has the added benefits to include dedicated emergency medical care providers responding to all calls, whether Penn affiliates or not, within our patrol zone, and providing triage until a full ambulance can arrive. This innovative harm reduction model was replicated by the Philadelphia Fire Department in Kensington with their AR2 unit in order to respond to the opioid epidemic. We've previously spoken about our allied traffic control aides who we use to help relieve the traffic flow in the dense areas of the health system, a non-armed force to solve a community problem. And another example is in recent years, we've worked with partners in alcohol and other drug initiatives and VPUL on our Good Neighbor program. In that program, we seek to bring together Penn students who are living in the off-campus West Philadelphia neighborhoods with their neighbors to start conversations, to get them to know them as people and communicate with them. This can result in fewer conflicts and fewer calls for intervention. We prioritize meeting students where they are. We participate in a lot of training, and we practice restorative justice. These are 3 recent examples of innovative problem solving, but thinking outside the box is not new to public safety. You just heard from Michaela with Collective Climb and their mission to create a restorative justice practice in West Philadelphia. And we've been assisting them in that project. As she knows and stated, juvenile police-assisted diversion is nothing new to public safety. We've been diverting children for low-level offenses for decades. Instead of bringing them into the criminal justice system, which I think we all agree is not the best place for anybody, we take them home to their caretakers and we ask them if they're familiar with our PAL program. PAL is the Police Athletic League, and it's provided programming to children in Philadelphia for over 70 years. Penn Police fund and staff the Tucker PAL Center for Children in West Philadelphia. That includes SAT prep, college mentoring, tutor, athletics, etc. And it's open to all school-age children within the West Philadelphia community. We practice the co-responder interdisciplinary model in our response to community members in crisis, and you've heard a lot about that from our partners at Wellness, CAPS, VPUL, Student Intervention Services, our resource centers, and others about our response to mental health crisis, as well as sexual assault. Our collaboration with our university partners has been recognized by the Cleary Center, which seeks to guide colleges and universities on best practices in campus safety. Finally, I want to talk about fairness, procedural justice, and quality control. Our policies and procedures align with the tenets of President Obama's report on 21st century policing. Procedural justice is paramount, not just to ensure that things are done by the book, but because we want to know how our community experiences policing in order to build trust. We've talked a lot about complaints against police in these hearings, and I want to add to that discussion. Hand in hand with complaints from the community are internal investigations that arise from observations by other officers and supervisors. We believe in being active bystanders. We encourage peer intervention and close supervision. It's often observations by supervisors and other officers that lead to course correction and discipline, and it's an important part of what we do. We've terminated officers for various behaviors that have been brought to our attention by fellow officers. In fact, more investigations arise from internal reports in our early warning system than from complaints against police from the community. As discussed, and also relevant to procedural fairness and quality control, is our hiring model. We talked a lot about the community boards and making sure that our community members are included in those. I'd also highlight that each finalist must undergo a psychological evaluation done by an independent doctor. Occupational health is critical because, as we know from Professor Tracy Mears at Yale and others, hurt people hurt people. We want to create a culture of health here. Candidates must also pass an extensive background check that includes interviews with colleagues and neighbors. We contact former police department employers, ask how they were as an officer, as well as others. So in conclusion, I want to say something that we emphasize. It's really emphasized something that we say every year at new student orientation to our new first-year students. We know that every person comes to Penn with different life experiences. Some know police officers, some have never met a police officer, and some have had really negative experiences with police in their own lives. Most have not experienced our style of community-based policing, and we recognize that. This work is always ongoing, and we look forward to continuing the dialogue. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It really means a lot that you took the time, and we know that you took the invitation kind of last minute, so really thank you for pulling that together in just a day or so. I have a couple questions, and the first one is, I know that you and VP Rush and others from Public Safety have been tuning in for most of the hearings, as you mentioned. If you could reflect on the hearings a little bit more and what you've heard. I think the first question is sort of what has been most challenging to hear, and then have you gotten anything out of it? I.e., that's a great idea. We should think about implementing that. And I know you can't speak on behalf of the whole division, but from what you've heard and maybe your personal experience.
And I'm taking notes so I make sure I answer all of your questions. Yes, we have listened very closely, and it has been challenging. And we hear a lot of pain. It's really hard. As I said, we're kind of programmed to respond and to help, and it's been really hard to hear the pain that we're feeling from our own community. And it's understandable pain, right? I mean, Breonna Taylor, Michael Brown, George Floyd. I mean, there are a lot of Black and brown people who have died at police hands, and beyond that, Trayvon Martin. I mean, this isn't something that's new. We hear that pain, and we hear a lot of ideas on how to solve it. Some, we're very open to, and some are not. I think one idea that we've heard is including more community members on the advisory board. And, Chaz, you're a member of that advisory board, and we're certainly open to that. We've heard a lot of ideas about revision to some procedures. And I think, we're willing to take, frankly, all of the ideas into consideration and see what's possible and what's not. And, we're here to listen.
Thank you. I just have one more question, then I'll pass it to Professor Roberts. You're in a pretty unique position in that you're not a sworn officer, but you're in leadership there at Public Safety. And I think that you also get a perspective of Penn Police that most people don't. You sort of see them when they're not walking a beat, when they're not responding to stuff. You sort of see them as colleagues, and you see them literally backstage. How can Penn Police improve? I mean, I think one of the things that broadly at the university we think about is, we're doing great in so many ways, but there's always room for improvement. In every corner of the university, we can always get better. How do you, and again, I don't want to put you in a difficult position to sort of get ahead of anybody or speak about colleagues in some ways, but from what you could share, how do you think Penn Police, and then maybe even broadly the division, you shared so much good that's happening. How can they do better?
Yeah, I think, thanks for that question. I think it's a great question. And I think that what we're hearing, we do a lot, as I've said, to try and build that trust. But we need to do more. We need to do better because we know that we're hearing a lot of people who aren't feeling that trust. So we need to take a deep look and examine what we are doing and what more we can do to do that. I think we are, as we're sitting here, adding additional trainings in response to what we're hearing. While we do an extensive training every year on a variety of issues. We've done training on racial profiling. We've done training on religious diversity. We've done training on the LGBT community, and we are an agency that's always open to change and adaptation. We've provided you with hundreds of directives, and you'll see one of those that we recently added had to do with our response to the trans community. We're innovative. We want to keep up and be in line with what's going on and responsive to our community. And we have to constantly look like that. And I think that's what part of this process is doing. Where else can we improve? What else can we educate ourselves about so that we can respond best to our community?
Thank you.
And thank you very much for your remarks and joining us today again on rather short notice. We appreciate it. So to follow up on Reverend Howard's questions, and you're listening to our prior hearings, you said you've heard hard things and you've heard of pain, and you referred to the pain from police violence outside of Penn. But I would say that a lot, if not most, of the pain that students expressed, and also some staff expressed for their own children, was the consistent concern that Black students on Penn's campus have been harassed by Penn police or security working for Penn. We just heard it a moment ago. And the idea that they feel they have to wear Penn gear to protect themselves from Penn police. And so I wondered if you'd talk to that, why you think that is happening and how it can be addressed. I mean, clearly all the trainings and directives have not stopped that from happening. The other question I have is about accountability, and you mentioned that you were open to considering community involvement. I just wanted to get some clarity on whether there you were referring to, as has been suggested by some, non-Penn West Philly residents as members of the advisory board. And then finally, well, we could stop there and I could follow up with another question. So why don't we stop there? I mean, I'm really interested in your response to what you heard from a number of students and from Penn staff who've had children at Penn or a grandson at Penn, and every one of them mentioned this issue. I believe it's every single one mentioned this issue of a concern either they experienced being asked for identification, being or harassed in some way. And again, this common perception that if you're a Black student at Penn, you need to wear Penn gear to protect yourself.
Yeah, thank you. I think that's a great question. And, first off, I'd say a couple of things. I think we also heard a lot about harassment from other agencies, and even though they're on Penn's campus, and that hurts. That hurts because that affects us and that affects people's perception of who we are as an organization. And it hurts because it's happening to a member of our community, right? That's something we want to help correct. And we want to help, whether it's certainly if it's one of our officers or one of our security officers, we want to address it immediately. And that is why the complaint process especially is incredibly important. And what I will say is whenever we take, as previously stated, all complaints very seriously, but we also want to be particularly receptive and transparent with the person who is feeling hurt from that experience with one of our officers. We want them to explain kind of whatever our investigation was into the incident, because I think what people want to know is that we are being fair, right? So one, they want to feel like they're listened to. Two, they want to feel like whatever decision is made is a fair decision process, right? And they want to be treated with dignity. They want to be treated with respect. And clearly in that moment, they were not. So we need to, one, address the harm that was caused, as well as in our meeting with them, respect that and meeting them where they are. And I think they want to be treated like they matter. And that's why the complaint process, not only the actual investigation, but the way in which the information is shared with the complainant is so important to us. And I don't recall if this was talked about, but we partner with all of the resource centers to kind of assist in a lot of those conversations. That said, for specific incidents, and I can't speak to any specific incident at this time, and I don't feel this is the appropriate forum, sometimes we do go back and we do look at the policies and procedures that do exist and whether or not those need to be changed. And we need to make sure that if a change is appropriate, that we're communicating what those changes are to the person who had that experience. So I think that's important. Your second question was in regards to whether I was referring to including non-Penn affiliates on the advisory board. And I'd say we're certainly open to that. I hope these hearings showed not only to you and Reverend Chaz and the Quattrone Center, but to other people listening, is that we are known by our neighbors in the West Philadelphia community, and certainly we're open to that as a recommendation.
I guess a follow-up to that is part of the reason for the recommendation of including West Philly residents on the advisory board is also to make the advisory board more of an oversight board, because another issue that has come up in the hearings is whether there's enough external oversight of how complaints are handled, as opposed to them being handled completely internally. And there's people looking for some other oversight mechanism. So it would have to be, ideally both, that the advisory board at least this is the recommendation, have more of an oversight capacity to actually have an influence over what happens to complaints and other aspects of policy, and that West Philly residents would have an influence over that. So I don't know if you're ready to comment on that or not, but it's really a two-pronged suggestion for the advisory board, changing the strength of the advisory board, but also changing its composition.
Yeah, I hear the question, and I think what my only response at this time would be, you know, I think if that's one of the recommendations that comes out of this, we'd certainly want to take a closer look at that. In previous discussions, we've talked about, you know, how that oversight would in some way have to be governed by a collective bargaining agreement, and I'm not here as the expert on the collective bargaining agreement, but you know, we're here to listen and to see what the recommendations are that come out of this.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. Just one more follow-up question. You referred to the diversion program and working with Michaela Warwick's organization. One of her suggestions, which she just stated in her remarks, and this is something that's come up throughout the hearings, I'm sure you've heard as well, is whether there are roles that the Penn police are filling right now that could be better filled by non-police officers, especially non-armed professionals. This came up in connection both with what Ms. Warwick was talking about in terms of criminal or so-called criminal activity offenses, disturbances, that kind of thing, but also in terms of Penn students who are having some sort of crisis. And Victoria Sanchez in our hearing on Tuesday mentioned sexual assault as really being the chief threat to students on campus, and that police are not the best responders to that. So I'm wondering if you've had any thoughts about these suggestions that have come up throughout, that there are roles that Penn police are playing that would be better filled by other professionals.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. So I think my first response to that is we do have examples where we've decided police aren't the best responders, such as the traffic control aides that we talked about, right? Mm-hmm. And we, throughout the past 20 years, I think have taken some police responsibilities. And that's why our partners at Allied have been very important on taking some responsibilities that have traditionally been police responsibilities, therefore freeing up police to do police things, right? And non-police to do non-police things. I'd also say, I think the best response to your question is, has been answered by a lot of our partners who have been on these calls. You heard from Dr. Dubé, you've heard from Dr. Saraf, you've heard from Sharon Smith, who headed student intervention services for years, about our approach to mental health response, and that we do, first off, as Dr. Dubé pointed out, Penn police are not responding to, you know, the vast majority of mental health cases that occur on our campus. But I think it's also been said by Sharon Smith, you know, there are times where we are needed, and we're very sensitive to that fact. We've been trained by outside agencies on mental health response. And I will say that if you ever had the opportunity to view some of our camera footage of our officers responding to people in those moments, you know, you would frankly forget that they are officers, as many people do. But we understand that it can be traumatic. Mm-hmm. Remind me of the second part of your question, Dorothy. I lost it.
I just brought up the issue. I was stating some of the areas where people we've heard from during the hearings have mentioned that police are not the best responders, and another one was sexual assault. So
that's a great question, and I wanted to clear up a couple of things. As your student talked about the other day regarding sexual assault, I think she would also agree with me in stating and as someone who I used to prosecute child victim sexual assault cases in Philadelphia, right? We know that, especially with sexual assault, that delayed reporting is quite common, right? And I would say, as kind of through our special services department, who are a confidential unit and are not police, they are the primary responders to incidents of sexual assault. And as someone who's been within that criminal justice system and seen how the cases played out, part of that is because, unfortunately, we've created a culture in this country where people aren't always inclined to report that in the moments in which it's happening. That said, whenever we do have somebody reporting an incident of sexual assault in that moment, aside from that brief response from a police officer, they are then partnered with a victim advocate who then takes them through the rest of the process if they choose to go through the criminal justice process, right? When someone comes to special services to report a sexual assault, they are given all of their options, whether they choose to go through the criminal justice system, whether they choose to go through the Title IX process here at Penn, whether they simply want support resources like CAPS or the Women's Center or the LGBT Center, or outside resources, Women Organized Against Rape, or nothing, right? It's their choice. It's about putting the power back into the hands of the survivor. And that is our model in our response to sexual assault.
Thanks. I just have one quick follow-up question. You mentioned if anyone saw the camera footage of police involved in certain crisis situations, and it just happens that an anonymous attendee in the Q&A, which I happened to notice, asked a question about whether Penn Police delete or archive camera footage, and is it available to the public?
So great question. It is not available to the public. It's considered evidence, depending on whether or not if a crime has been committed. We follow all state guidelines on video retention for body-worn camera footage.
And who has access to it then?
That is within the police department.
Okay. Thanks so much for all your, both your remarks and your answers to our questions.
Thank you for your time.
Thanks very much, Ms. Anderson. We really appreciate it. We will turn now to Natalie Zamora of the Penn Latin American Graduate and Professional Student Assembly. Ms. Zamora.
Great. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. First, I'd like to thank you all, the hearing committee, especially for inviting LAGAPSA to participate in this meeting. As the chair of LAGAPSA, the Latin American Graduate and Professional Student Assembly, I'm trusted to accurately represent my constituents for the university. It is impossible to accurately summarize all the experiences and feelings with and towards Penn Police or policing in general for such a large subsection of Penn graduate student community. In this statement, I've chosen to highlight a real perspective from one of our community members, and we'll follow their testimony with a closing statement. So she writes, "Hello, my name is Genesis Gilles Galarza, and I'm a PhD candidate in chemical and biomolecular engineering. In addition, I am the current chair of programming in the Latin American Graduate and Professional Student Assembly, where I take my role representing the interests of graduate Latinx community at Penn very seriously. The Latinx community is a beautifully diverse community of people of all races and identities, and today I specifically want to emphasize the needs of our Black and Afro-Latinx community here at Penn. In recent months, Black students and faculty at Penn have taken power back for themselves through various methods, including using social media as a tactic for holding members of the Penn community accountable. Instagram pages such as @BlackIvyLeague tell accounts of public safety officers staring, following, and harassing Black students on campus. Black students explicitly wearing Penn gear, which we just talked about, so as to try to pass for a Penn student as much as possible, and more examples. If these accounts of discrimination are how our Black students are treated by public safety officers, it doesn't take much to imagine what the experience is like for Black West Philadelphians who have been historically pushed out, gentrified, and policed, all in the name of keeping Penn safe. It is clear to me that Black communities throughout the United States have been historically terrorized by the police, and our communities here in Philadelphia are no different. As a brown Puerto Rican woman, as a former high school teacher, and as a resident of West Philadelphia, the issues surrounding the role of police in public safety is something that I and many members of our community feel very strongly about. Personally, I've taken action on these issues numerous times. However, one in particular stands out in my mind. On June 1st, I joined my fellow Philadelphians in a speak out and march against police violence toward Black communities. It was on this day I experienced firsthand the kind of violence we were protesting about. The march was quickly dispersed after the PPD sprayed tear gas over thousands of protesters marching on the I-676. I was injured while running away. The fear, pain, and anger I felt on this day was very small compared to how the PPD and Penn Police terrorized West Philadelphia just a couple of evenings before that incident, and has historically done so and continues to do so. They use tanks, chemical weapons, and riot gear and other equipment appropriate for perhaps for a war zone, but not for West Philadelphia. But even because chemical weapons are not allowed for use in war zones. It is not lost on me that Penn administration makes an active choice to continue funding and maintaining the second largest university police force in the country, while at the same time being a part of being one of two institutions in the Ivy League that does not participate in payments in lieu of taxes, also known as pilots. Under the appropriate oversight, pilots would allow funds to be redirected to benefit the West Philadelphia community into schools, after-school programs, and community centers. In other words, programming that helps to reduce and prevent crime. The fact that weapons of war are available to police from public funds, but yet as a teacher, I received a meager $200 yearly to spend on classroom items for 150 plus students is absolutely despicable. And Penn has a role in that. Words like, "we hear you," will not cut it anymore. Direct action is the way to progress forward. There is overwhelming support for these initiatives. A petition signed by over 15,000 people called for the end of Penn's relationship with the PPD, as well as another petition that was signed by over 1,000 faculty members who support Penn for pilots. I believe that we can keep the Penn community safe while still maintaining a positive and healthy relationship with the primarily Black community we share this space with, all without the need for extreme policing. So in closing, speaking as myself and not Hennessy's, who's actually watching this call, hi Hennessy's, I want to again highlight that though it's really impossible to represent all the viewpoints of all Latin American grad students on our campus, we do believe that Penn Police and the Philadelphia Police have a duty to gain the trust of Black and Brown community members, both on campus and in West Philly. This testimony highlights the ways in which racism exists and is perpetuated at Penn and in our city, as well as how this delicate relationship between police and the people can break community bonds. As the representative of LAGAPSA, I thank you for the work that you're already doing. It was really lovely to hear all that Penn Police is already doing from Kathleen. But we also really strongly encourage you to do more. We need accountability for wrong actions. We need deliberate changes that show you stand with both the Penn community and the people of this neighborhood. We need to validate, seek atonement, and rectify the experiences of Black and Brown people and the relationship that they have with police in Penn and the greater Philadelphia area. Though there weren't as many concrete bullet points, I'm now recognizing that this is one of the last or the last session that you all have. though we don't have as many concrete guiding points, I hope that even this testimony was helpful in sharing a little bit about our experiences as students. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Zamora. That was very helpful. It's interesting, at the last hearing, I asked Victoria Sanchez about the experiences of Latinx students, because we've mostly heard about the experiences of Black students in our hearings. And her response was, well, it depends on whether they're Afro-Latinx or not, because if they're, Black students with Latinx background, they're treated as Black students and have some of these same concerns. So it was really helpful to hear Hannah's statement about being a brown Puerto Rican woman and her experiences. I wondered, though, if there were other concerns related specifically to Latinx students. For example, maybe immigration and public safety. I shouldn't say specifically to Latinx, because other people have immigration issues as well, but currently that I think disproportionately Latinx students might under the current situation we're in. So I don't know. I'm just wondering if that there are other concerns that have come up that you've heard from Latinx graduate students. And then, let's stop there, and then I'll follow up with, I have a couple other questions I'd like to ask, but not to get too overwhelming and confusing. Let me stop there for now.
Sure. Yeah, thank you. I definitely believe that Latinx students on our campus are really concerned about the detention centers that are in this country, here in Philly, and ICE in particular, and having a sanctuary campus. It's interesting, one of my classes, we were taking turns thinking about how administrators, students on opposite sides of their beliefs about immigration would respond in the situation that happened this past fall when the former ICE director was invited to come to campus to speak at the Perry Worldhouse event. And I think that is actually a really good example of, not solely graduate students, definitely the undergraduate students were making their voices heard, but I think that still is absolutely important to take into consideration the role that our public safety officers may have in maintaining the peace, or our freedom of speech coordinators that have to be there at these kinds of events, whether the event actually happens or gets shut down. It's really intricate. I think with some of the recent news related to forced sterilization in different camps is, while not directly related to Penn police here, is something that I think the Latinx community at Penn is really trying to grapple with, and something to note too. It's interesting when we talk about kind of the relationship between our Black community at Penn and the Latinx community at Penn, or just broadly the relationships between these two groups, the whistleblower being a Black woman. I think there's the reason why I think it was really important for us to be a voice in this hearing is that, we stand in solidarity with the Black community here. And they don't have to be Latinx for us to stand with them. So it's a really complex relationship, but maybe that answers some of that.
It does. And I certainly like your ending on solidarity as an important part of all of this. So another question I had was whether or not your organization has taken a stand on some of the issues and recommendations you mentioned. So You mentioned pilots and other types of reinvestment that I believe are connected to public safety. And I didn't know if you had a position on that. You mentioned ending the relationship with the Philadelphia Police Department. Is there a position on that, and any other concrete action steps? I just want to be clear on what was in Hannes's statement, which are all important recommendations, but whether they are also backed by the Latin American Graduate and Professional Student Assembly.
Yeah, great question. Admittedly, we had only recently heard about these hearings in general, so we don't necessarily have, our fingers to the pulse of what Penn students and Penn graduate Latinx students on our campus feel one way or another about certain initiatives. And so in our statement, we decided, okay, well, we should highlight someone who has really strong opinions, and kind of noting that LAGAPSA hasn't officially made any public statements. Again, part of that being that we need to understand what our constituents are really interested in doing and interested in focusing on. But we still, again, want to be in this space, want to share opinions that broadly, even if not specifically talking about PPD or pilots, broadly we would support. So yes.
Okay, thank you so much. And certainly if LAGAPSA does end up, in the next couple weeks or so, I mean, we would be interested in the future as well, but if there are certain recommendations or you sign on to certain recommendations, please let our initiative know. Thank you so much. That was really helpful.
Thank you, Ms. Zamora. We really appreciate you taking the time to come in and talk with us. We'll turn next to Tatiana Johnson from BARS, please.
Oh, turn on your microphone.
Oh, my bad. Hello, everyone. My name is Tatiana Johnson. I'm a senior at Penn, and I'm the current political director for BARS. I appreciate being given the opportunity to speak at this event with you all. I would like to start off by saying that I am in full support of the organizers and the students who are fighting for the divestment of funding from the Philadelphia Police Department and for the funding of public education. Penn Police has never made me or my friends feel safe, honestly. In fact, their presence alone has heightened our anxieties, as we know that with police presence comes impending violence. Whether it's walking past the Penn Police building on Chestnut, or even just seeing an officer in the Wawa, Penn Police, for me, has never been a welcome sight. I fear any encounter with them. When we were freshmen, one of our orientations required us to put Penn Police's number in our phone. Not only was this extremely insensitive considering these fears that are obvious for myself and other Black students, but the number itself hasn't been very useful. I have never called Penn Police. I know that can be a death sentence for any Black person on Penn's campus and any Philly resident. When or if I feel unsafe, I rely on my friends, I rely on my community, the people that know me and can engage in harm reduction in non-fatal ways. BARS and myself believe in the abolition of Penn Police as well as other police departments nationwide.
Okay, it was very direct, very clear. Thank you very much, Ms. Johnson. So I think you were very clear about how you feel about the Penn Police, how you feel other Black students feel about the Penn Police, and why. You mentioned that you've never called the Penn Police. It sounds like you don't want to. And so I do think you made it clear why. So I'm not going to ask you more about that. I mean, if you want to talk more about that, that's fine. You spoke very briefly. So if you want to elaborate on why you would not call the Penn Police, it might be helpful. I mean, I think some people don't understand that. And so it might be helpful for you to explain that some more. But I also want to ask, what can Penn do to protect your safety, to make you feel safe? You're saying it's not the police. What can Penn do to create a safe environment for you and other Black students? So let's go with that for now.
Well, to elaborate on why I've never called the Penn Police, I don't need the Penn Police. I haven't needed them, to be honest. If I'm feeling unsafe, again, I rely on my family, I rely on my friends, I rely on my community. And I just know, like I said, the dangers of police presence, to be frank. What can Penn do? I think Penn can meet our material needs. I know they can help me with better financial aid. I know they can help me with better mental health services. I don't really think the presence of police is necessary for me to feel safe. As a Black student, I know Penn putting funding in CASA, for example, the Caribbean American Students Association, would help me feel at home on campus. Community, family, those are the things that make people feel safe, Black people feel safe, not police presence.
Yeah, that's a really helpful perspective on what the money could be spent on. Are there other things you would suggest that Penn spends its funds on that perhaps are being spent on police now that would be better spent?
I definitely,
what you said was really helpful. I think that's an interesting perspective to say, actually, these organizations on campus make me feel safer, and they could be supported more. Students' own material needs are important. I'm just wondering if there are other things that you think Penn could reinvest funds in that would be safe, create a safer environment for everybody.
I think Penn can definitely reinvest funds in public schools all across Philly. That will definitely help Philly residents feel safer, knowing that their students are in fully funded schools.
Yeah. Do you want to tell us some more about your organization, Beyond Arrest, Rethinking Systemic Oppression, and specifically how some of the work you're doing relates to the Penn Police or policing in West Philadelphia, for example?
Yeah, okay. So BARS is the first and only criminal justice organization on Penn's campus. We were founded about 4 years ago by a now graduated senior. For a while, BARS has not really taken much of a political stance. We've mostly been doing education work, service work. But this year, we're trying very hard to take a political stance, especially in the avenue of abolition. In regard to how we feel about police and policing, we're working really hard to kind of spread and uplift community voices in relation to abolition and kind of abolition ideology.
Well, great. Thank you so much. You're a great representative of your organization and Penn. And we really appreciate you taking the time to join us today. Take good care.
Thank you, Ms. Johnson. And we'll turn to our final speaker for the day, Carson Eckerd, the Chair External for SKU, the Student Committee on Undergraduate Education.
Thank you, Professor Roberts and Reverend Howard, for asking me to speak today. My name is Carson Eckerd, and I'm the Chair External of the Student Committee on Undergraduate Education, or SKU, the policy branch of Penn student government. SKU's mission is to address any and all issues that impacts the undergraduate academic experience. And today I would like to talk a little bit about how the heavy presence and actions of DPS on campus negatively impact students' experiences at Penn, a harm that falls disproportionately on Black students. As you've heard from others, Black students are subject to random stops, searches, ID checks by DPS as they walk home. If the purpose of Penn Police is to keep students safe, then why is it that some students cannot walk home from the library without being threatened by Penn Police? Whose safety and well-being are we really trying to protect? And how can we claim that DPS makes campus safe for everyone when some students cannot walk around campus without fear? That Penn Public Safety prioritizes the safety and emotional well-being of students who look like me is white supremacy in action. Every student here deserves to feel entirely safe on campus, always, and the presence of DPS renders that an impossibility at times. Moreover, as my friend Jessica Gooding mentioned during her hearing a few weeks ago, DPS is further responsible for ensuring that campus is not a welcoming place for those outside the Penn community. This is Penn's year of civic engagement. However, civic engagement must mean more than a few service days or volunteer opportunities. Civic engagement should mean that Penn's campus is a welcoming place for everyone, regardless of their university affiliation, and a constant commitment to uplifting the West Philadelphia community, which Penn has harmed for far too long. Civic engagement looks like pilots, yes, but it also looks like an open campus where Philadelphians, especially Black Philadelphians, can come without fear of harassment by the police. As Amelia Carter noted during her testimony, the reach of Penn Police extends far beyond campus property and harms West Philadelphians even when they are not close to campus. The expansion of Penn Police's presence is only the latest in Penn's long history of harming Black and brown communities around campus and elsewhere. Since my freshman year, I've also been a researcher on the Penn and Slavery Project, where I focused primarily on the Morton Cranial Collection and Penn Medicine's role as a primary agent in the construction of race science and the creation of pseudoscientific justifications for racism and colonialism. While it is heartening to see the university begin to acknowledge its complicity in slavery and the slave trade, we're responsible both for the redress of past wrongs and the correction of present ones. To address past wrongs without reckoning with present failures is to perpetuate Penn's past racism and erasure. How can the university claim to truly address its past while still inflicting harm on Black and brown people around campus and around Philadelphia? Lastly, I'm part of another group, one whose existence is often used to justify the presence of police on campus and elsewhere. As a survivor of relationship violence and sexual assault, my experience and similar experiences of thousands of students on this campus cannot be used as justification for the heavy presence of police at Penn. We need to feel safe as we heal and decide next steps, and tying offices like special services that support survivors to Penn Police can make seeking support even more difficult. We need more support and more compassion. We need more funding and more easy access to organizations that support survivors, not more funding for the presence of officers on campus. As I look towards graduation, I hope that campus will be safer for future Penn students and Philadelphians. I strongly feel that reallocating the Penn Police budget, re-examining the practices of all Penn Public Safety members, and increasing transparency around its protocols and budget, as well, and making campus a safer and more welcoming place for all Philadelphians is a necessary step towards justice and accountability.
Thanks, Carson. I have to boast that Carson is the third student from my reproductive rights and justice class to speak at these hearings, and how blessed I am to have such terrific students. But you see, if you put justice in the title of your course, you get wonderful students who are committed to justice. So thank you for all that you do at Penn. You didn't even mention half of all the things that you're involved in. I want to highlight and ask you about three things from your testimony. One was that you suggested that neither Black students at Penn nor Black West Philly residents feel welcome on Penn's campus. And this is something I've asked people about throughout these hearings. What is the connection between the experiences of students at Penn on campus and the experiences of West Philly neighbors with the Penn Police? Again, some people see them as separate issues, and you are another person to connect the two. And I wondered if you'd say a little bit more about that, because I think it's important both to understanding Penn Police's relationship to West Philly, but also understanding why we are hearing so much about the experiences of harassment and unwelcomeness in various forms that Black students have at Penn related to the Penn Police?
I mean, I think that starts with Penn's history as a very white and elitist institution. And with that, I think historically has come an idea of what a Penn student looks like. It's also important, I think, to note that white Philadelphians, white passing Philadelphians are not stopped by Penn Police when they're walking around campus or sitting on College Green. And I think dismantling that idea, that racism that still evidently exists in Penn Police system is a key step in making sure that everyone feels welcome on campus. I've never been harassed by Penn Police in that way. Nobody's ever asked me if I'm a Penn student or not. I will say that I've been harassed in other ways. I've been catcalled and photographed without my consent by members of DPS, but that's a very different form of harassment and not one that necessarily made me feel like I didn't belong on this campus. And I think that racism extends to Penn students as well as to people who aren't Penn students is a really, I think is a really, really concerning thing, especially given that Penn regularly presents itself as sort of a bastion for progress and for success in Philadelphia. It's also the largest employer and private employer in Philadelphia. And many of Penn's workers are Black people who, if they weren't in uniform, might not be considered welcome on campus by our police department. I think that that's extremely concerning. And especially, I referenced Penn's year of civic engagement. Penn is always trying, we're always trying to say that it's an open university, that this is, a sort of safe place and a place of progress. And that's evidently not true. And it's not only not true for people who don't attend Penn, who aren't able to come and be safe on our campus. It's also true, as you've heard from several other students who spoke about their own experiences, it's not true for all Penn students. And we all received the same acceptance letter. So we should all feel just as safe on campus.
Yeah, thank you. Well, I want to follow up with what could Penn do to make Penn's campus welcoming for everybody, regardless of race?
I think as Tatiana noted, just the presence of police is sort of antithetical to that. I think it goes beyond things like trainings. I think it really decreasing the presence of police officers is first and foremost a key step. I also think even things like the security around, say, attending a conference at Penn, even conferences that are ostensibly open to the public, is a form of gatekeeping, a form of making people feel unwelcome, even when they're technically invited. So I think both of those things, I think first and foremost, decreasing police presence. But I also think just in general, that the campus would be considered more open if there was less security, less gatekeeping at the entrance of every building, especially when public events are going on inside. In the long term would make Penn a more open place, especially for those who aren't affiliated with the university.
Thanks. You raised a point that came up in last Tuesday's hearing about relationship violence and sexual assault. You didn't mention, and I don't, it doesn't matter whether your personal experience was at Penn or not, but you have experience with sexual assault. And we heard that, especially from Victoria Sanchez, that police aren't good responders for sexual assault. And so you also suggested that in your comments. And I wondered if you'd say some more about what you think, if you want to, more about the issue of sexual violence on campus and how Penn should address it.
I think it's well known that sexual assault is a massive issue on college campuses across the country, and Penn is certainly no exception. In the last survey, it was almost 25%, I think, of undergraduate women who said that they have experienced sexual assault, and that's not even considering the entire number of all of Penn students, many of whom have also experienced this. My personal experience was at Penn, and I think that it's that police don't prevent sexual assault. I did work with student special services in the wake of that, it took me almost a year to figure out sort of what avenues were best. And I ended up working with special services only after they came to PVP, because I didn't feel safe or comfortable going to the police department. It felt too scary, too intimidating. And as Ms. Anderson noted, late reporting is really common. I think tying policing to sexual assault, both prevention or response, is really not effective. For me, finding help became much more effective when those two things were very deliberately sort of divorced from each other. And I think that the assumption that more security equals less sexual assault is just definitely not true. When I think back on my own experiences, as well as the experiences of everyone else I know to be a survivor from experiences at Penn, I first can't think of any where the Penn police did stop it. I can't think of any where the Penn police were the primary responders to it. And I also can't think of a situation where somebody said, if only the police were there, this wouldn't have happened. I think if we were, as we talk about redirecting funding, in addition to things like pilots, funding for cultural centers, there's so many places this money could go. Increased education and around consent, increased resources for people who experience sexual violence on campus. I think that's where healing begins. That's where prevention begins. I think in a lot of ways, unless a survivor decides to pursue criminal action, which is really, really rare on college campuses, there's no need for the police to ever be involved, and the survivor can make that decision and go to the police independently. So yeah, I think that there's a lot of other ways to address the issue, and maybe ones that are more effective at preventing it.
Thanks. So you've partially answered my third question, which was about reallocating funds, reinvesting them, funds that are currently spent on police to other avenues. And you mentioned one would be education about sexual assault and consent. I wondered if you mentioned pilots. I believe you just mentioned also public education in Philadelphia. I just wondered if you had other ideas about what money could be reallocated, reinvested, transferred from one to the other aspect of, broadly speaking, safety at Penn, safety and well-being at Penn that would benefit everyone.
Well, I think Michaela's earlier point about trained professionals who are not police to respond to situations on Penn's campus and around Penn's campus would be something that I would really like to see. I think when I think about most, especially given that the Philadelphia police still exist, I think that there's a lot of opportunity to, remove Penn police, as she said, as a criminalizing force, and instead put that money into services that can still respond, but not in a way that is criminalizing or is potentially dangerous, potentially deadly, especially for Black students. I think additionally, Penn can always use more resources to promote the experiences of FIGLY students, to promote the experiences of Black students. There's often not enough resources, both in academic departments and cultural centers, in order to truly support the experience that we all come here hoping to have. I would also definitely echo other people in suggesting that some of these funds be reallocated to just better supporting the West Philadelphia community. I would be interested in Penn funding studies on gentrification and its impact over the years on West Philadelphia, and then from there analyzing potentials for reparative action. And I feel like these are all places that this money could go. I think also, we've been talking a lot about in student government and elsewhere, instituting better anti-racism training at Penn. And that's something that would cost some money. This could be another place to allocate funds. But I think that there's a ton of places that this money could go that would support both Penn students and people who live in and around Penn in a way that isn't predicated on policing.
Well, thank you so much for your really helpful remarks and for all you do. The Penn and Slavery Project, SKU, bars, there's just so many aspects that are making Penn a better place. And I really appreciate it, Carson. And thanks for being here today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thanks, Ms. Eckert, and thank you, Professor Roberts. Ms. Eckert was our last speaker of the day, and so Professor Roberts, I don't know if you have any other closing remarks you'd like to make, or if you'd like me to wrap it up.
Well, I'll just say thank you to everybody who participated in the hearings, as well as giving us input online and in other ways. If you've got other ideas to help us as we now turn to our recommendations, we really would appreciate it. And we're just grateful for everybody's support and input in this really, really urgent and important task.
Thank you, Professor Roberts, and thanks again to our speakers and to our audience who asked questions throughout all of the hearings. While this is the conclusion of the public hearings, the conversations are going to remain online at pennpublicsafetyreview.org. To Professor Roberts' point, there is still time to submit recommendations, suggestions, experiences, observations about the Division of Public Safety, again, at pennpublicsafetyreview.org. That can be done anonymously if you wish. There's also a voicemail that is on there if you would rather leave a voicemail to do that. The process from here is that the presidential advisors, Professor Roberts and Dr. Howard, will be gathering insights from these conversations and all of the information that we've previously discussed that has been provided, not just by the Division of Public Safety, but by many others, and using that information to formulate their recommendations to President Gutman, Provost Pritchett, and the university. Thank you for an incredibly insightful and thought-provoking, not just this afternoon, but 8 afternoons. We will post a recording and a transcript as soon as possible and move forward into the recommendation generating part of the process. It's been a pleasure to support the process and you, Professor Roberts and Reverend Howard, and we'll look forward to next steps. Thank you very much, and everybody be well.